Some really powerful images in that clip we've just seen there. Deputy Lord Lieutenant, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome, friends, to this recognition of what occurred in Srebrenica in July 1995. Today, in these most unusual times, we come together here on Zoom, representing the Basildon community, as we do every year, as part of our inclusion and diversity calendar, as we work with the community to remember events and to recognise various days throughout the year. And today is our opportunity to remember the terrible genocide that occurred in Srebrenica in July 1995. 8,372 men and boys were murdered and buried in mass graves simply because of their identity. The majority were Muslim. This is no doubt the final act of ethnic cleansing that had developed during the Bosnian War. This taking place only 50 years after the international community had said, never again, after the horrors of World War II and the acts committed against the Jewish and other communities, once again purely based on their identity. Hate can develop and grow so easily within communities if left to go unchecked. Indeed, even in today's society, we're seeing a rise in hate crime with many minority sections of our community. And we've even seen worrying examples here of late in Basildon Borough of some terrible hate crimes against individuals simply because of who they are. Only this week, we've heard again that hate crime figures have increased yet again. We must stand firm and we must stand strong, learning from the mistakes of the past and make it clear that hate is not acceptable in our community. We've got to learn from the past and ensure that the future is a place where people of all backgrounds, as long as they're good, law-abiding citizens, are welcome in our society. We should be celebrating diversity and learning from each other. Let us seek to continually bridge that divide. In the words spoken by the inspiration for a charity whom I've worked very closely with over the last year, Joe Cox MP, we are far more united and have more in common with each other than that which divides us. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I'd also like to welcome all of you and our special guests whom we'll be hearing from shortly. I'd also like to thank our fantastic inclusion and diversity team at Basildon Council for their work with the community in putting on this event. I'm now going to invite our Deputy Lord Lieutenant, Lady Sidra Naeem, who is also the chair of Basildon Women's Together, and she's going to share some thoughts with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at today's Srebrenica Memorial Day. Like Holocaust is remembered each year, the atrocities which happened in Srebrenica should also be remembered every year too. Some of the massacres that happened were very similar to the Holocaust, yet a lot of people in the world do not even realize what even actually happened. Like Holocaust is remembered every year, Srebrenica event, I've only just recently noticed that it is now being remembered more and more. And the credit really goes to Basildon Council. I think the diversity inclusion team are absolutely fantastic in bringing all these kinds of events to light amongst the community. So I think that that's very, very good. Everybody knows what happened during and afterwards in Srebrenica, but why did it all actually happen? What is the history behind why and everything happens? So I'm going to put on a video which will show you the history of how the events actually took place.
We would like to think that genocide, the systematic extermination of a specific group of people, cannot happen in our modern, enlightened world, but unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, the worst genocide Europe has experienced since the atrocities of World War II occurred within recent memory. This was the Bosnian Genocide. The Bosnian Genocide refers specifically to the massacre of 8,000 Muslims in a Bosnian town in July 1995. But this massacre was just the low point of a civil war in the area that lasted from 1992 to 1995 and resulted in 100,000 deaths of mostly Bosnian Muslims. A little background information helps clarify how such a tragic event took place. Bosnia, now called Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the surrounding area has endured ethnic and territorial tensions for quite some time. Bosnia used to be part of the former Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia has existed in various forms from the 1920s to 2003 and included various states like Bosnia and Serbia. In the 1980s and 90s, Yugoslavia began to fall apart due to economic instability, oppressive communist policies, and ethnic conflict. Separate states, comprised of mostly the predominant ethnic group in those areas, began declaring independence from Yugoslavia. In 1992, Bosnia did just that, while Serbia remained a part of Yugoslavia until 2003. In 1991, Bosnia had 4 million people composed of 4 main ethnic groups. Bosniaks, or Bosnian Muslims, made up 44% of the population. 31% were Serbs, 17% were Croatian, and 8% were Yugoslavian. The problem was that these different ethnic groups often quarreled with one another. Thus, as Yugoslavia broke apart and new nations were formed, civil war ensued as various ethnic groups fought for control over land and resources. Though Bosniaks made up the majority of the population, the Serbs in Bosnia and neighboring Serbia were hungry for control of Bosnia. Once Bosnia declared its independence, the Serbs began a military campaign to expel the Bosniaks from the area. Neighbor turned on neighbor, and the civil war, called the Bosnian War, tore through the area from 1992 to 1995.
An estimated 100,000 people were killed, 80% of whom were Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims, mainly men and boys from the town of Srebrenica. The ethnic cleansing massacre, also known as the Srebrenica Genocide, was the largest in Europe since the Holocaust. Okay, so to avoid this happening again in the future, we need to stop fighting over land, power, and money, because that is actually why this massacre happened in the first place. We need to promote interfaith dialogue, integrating into the multicultural society that we are living in. I believe it is important to intermingle and learn about each other's faith and culture. People should come together and overcome differences and celebrate their similarities and shared values. We need to develop good relations and cooperation and further cement strong friendships and alliances between our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Lieutenant. Thank you, Lady Sidra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Lady Naeem.
It's fantastic, and thank you very much for sharing that. I know certainly for myself, you know, the terrible massacre that happened there, it is something that I only found out a lot more about last year. I was quite young when it happened, and it was something that when we held this event last year and I researched into the background, it was really quite shocking that we don't talk about this more and that we don't remember what happened there more. We always, obviously, we'll never forget what happened in World War II. Well, this was equally as bad, and you're right, this still goes on to different extremes across the world, and we must continue to fight any sort of genocide like this so that it never happens again. Thank you so much. We're now going to watch another video, and this is the Srebrenica Survivors video, 20 years on it's called.
Members of Mehmed Hodic's family lie here in the graveyard of a small mining town in eastern Bosnia near the Serbian border. For generations, Muslim families had lived peacefully alongside Serb neighbours until 1992, when a virulent form of Serbian nationalism gave birth to a bloody civil war.
Gledam pticu kako nosi hranu ptičića. Kako ih štiti, kako ih čuva. Kažem, bolja si majka nego je.
Predstavljati ne mogu ništa. Na živima sam od svoje 14. godine pijem tabletu. Pobili mi sve, ništa mu život nisu dali. Ni meni, ni moje sestre. 3 braće i oca.
By 1995, Serb forces controlled much of north and eastern Bosnia, but had failed to take Srebrenica. Instead, they had surrounded the town, supposedly a UN safe area, and held it under siege. By the beginning of July, fuel was running out, and no fresh food had been brought in since May.
Srebrenica je postala logor od 92. godine pa sve do 95. godine. To je bio jedan logor koji se ne može, od Srebrenice ne može priča ispričati. Srebrenica nikad neće biti završena priča. Kako je Srebrenica preživljavala, kako je se mučila, kako su ljudi se mučili, kako ljudi nisu imali hrane, kako nije bilo lijekova, kako su ranjenici mučili se.
On the 11th of July, Bosnian Serbs seized Srebrenica from the UN. Tens of thousands of Bosnian Muslims were forced to flee to the nearby village of Potocari, where 400 Dutch peacekeepers were based. Conditions in the overcrowded camp were deplorable.
Ja kažem uvijek, koliko god treba da odgovara Srbija i Srbi iz Bosne i Hercegovine, toliko treba da odgovaraju Ujedinjene nacije. Jer svi su nas izdali samo zbog toga što smo se tako zvale.
Ja Holandiju isto koji Srbe. Tako su majke ostali da nas spašava i on nas iskukali. Tako je to odrađeno. Ja to ne krijem slobodno, vi to objavite.
Serb soldiers forced the UN to leave the camp. People began to panic amid reports of rape and killing.
Mi smo došli utorak navečer na Počare, u sredu ujutru. Ja sam mislio da je to umprofor, oni su otprilike obukli njihove odjela, ali kad smo vidjeli da nosi oružje i bira jedno po jedno, što se kaže, kad čovjek uđe utor da kupi kurbane, pa ovaj se sviđa, ovaj ne sviđa, ovoga uzme, ovoga ostavi. Čim je pao prvi mrak u sredu navečer, mi smo nekako gore, ima iznad te barake gdje smo bili smješteni, valjda nisu još bilo okruženja napravili, čekali za četvrtak ujutru. U četvrtak ujutru nije nitko, da li bio malouman, da li bilo dijete, da li samo jel muško u četvrtak ujutru nije tudi opstalo.
The Bosnian Serb troops were under the command of General Ratko Mladic. In front of UN peacekeepers, Mladic promised the people of Srebrenica their sons and husbands would be safe. In nearby Potocari, the men were separated from the women.
I nije bilo malo vremena, Mladić se pojavio, počeo je govoriti kako nam neće ništa faliti, bacao je hljeb među djecu, tapšao je djecu po glavi. Dar je rekao, ljudi, to gasite kamere.
bile s nama 2 dana, 3. dan su ga dojeli. A nas su trpali u kamion i poslali van, i nikad ni traga ni glasa. A braća ošli preko šume i sad vam kažem. Znači sve.
On the night of the 11th of July, more than 10,000 Bosnian Muslim men set off through dense forest to try and reach safety. They were aiming for Tuzla, 30 miles away across the mountains. Bosnian Serb officers used UN uniforms and equipment to trick the men into surrendering.
To je bila briga kako će preći u Morčez. Biće gladne, biće žene. To je jedina briga bila, ne znajući šta ih čeka na tom putu. Kad sam znala, nikad se ne vrasta gladne.
Thousands of the men were captured, taken to execution sites near the Serbian border, killed, and buried in 21 mass graves. Many bodies were later dug up and reburied by Bosnian Serbs in an attempt to cover up their crimes. Both of Hatice's sons were murdered.
Ta stotinka sekunde ne može biti da nije prisutna. Gdje su, šta su, kako hinija, kad kiša pada, oni su zarobljeni negdje, oni su živi. I kad je 2010. godine, 10. maja, opet smo tako zovnuli i rekli su mi, našli smo ti drugo dijete. Ne mogu, rekao, sad znate kome mi se djetetu radi. Kaže, radi vam se o starijem sinu, jer po vašem govoru našli smo nešto materijala od pantola, što je bilo ispod kaiša. Tako da, pitala sam, i to niko, da Bog da to nikad niko ne doživija. Pitala sam koliko je tijela, bar da je kompletno tijelo. Kaže, nije kompletno tijelo, samo smo našli nešto od nogu, 2 kosti. Ja kažem, ja neću kopati, ja nisam ga rodila bez glave, nisam ga rodila tako, ja ne mogu kopati to dok ne bude sve. Kaže, nažalost, jer su te grobnice uništene, ne postoji mogućnost da se više nađe.
The remains of Mehmed's son were also found in a mass grave.
Nudio me nemoj Mehmede tamo da gledaš kosti, da gledam loban, pola mu je lobanje ima, pola nema, bile smo vilce ispravne i zubi. Mislio sam da mi to neće biti udarac i gledajući njegova rebra i kičmu i vrat i ovo. Međutim, kad sam vidio vilce i zube, ja ne znam kako nisam pao u komu. Čovječe. Ima i pola godine nisam mogao iz očiju da izvršim i dan danas. Što se kaže.
Srebrenica today is home to around 8,000 people. Before the war, Bosnian Muslims made up 80% of the population.
Makar imam kakav posao da se malo zanimam čim.
Nema posla. Kako se živi ako nije?
Šta sam doživio, šta sam... Pobili mi sve, ništa mu životu nisu dali.
That's the 4th time I've seen that video, and it's no less shocking or upsetting every time I see it. So we're shortly going to observe a 1-minute silence as we remember the atrocities that took place in Srebrenica, and other atrocities as well that we've seen across the world over the years. But in particular, we remember today Srebrenica. After the 1 minute silence, we will, if you are able to, all light a candle while Shamrika plays some music. So if we now just all take 1 moment just to reflect. Thank you. Thank you. And Shamrika, if we could have some music, please, and we shall, if anybody would like to, light a candle.